Hello, good evening, and it's good to see that you have come and you're interested in, mindfulness meditation. The topic this evening, I've been told, is the art of attention. Now, you might have known about this story of a student, novice monk, asking a Zen master, what is the essence of the Dhamma? What is the core teaching of the Buddha Dhamma? And the Zen master responded, attention. The student wasn't very happy with that. There must be something deeper, more philosophical. So he went back to the Zen master and again put the question, what is the essence of the Dhamma? The Zen master said, attention, attention, attention. That's it. Now, do we give ourselves full attention, or is it mostly just a partial attention? Even Microsoft, when they do the Windows 95, Windows latest version, they have many windows up, and they design it so the user is only required to use partial attention. So we flip through the different windows, different programs, and we're not fully attending, we're simply flipping through with partial attention. Now, attention is actually, we train the attention through mindfulness. So that's a Buddhist practice, although as we know, many in the West, many other, especially the modern psychotherapies, have taken up mindfulness, the business people, schools. There's been a big surge of interest in mindfulness in Western culture. But so, if we're training the mind in mindfulness, we're actually focusing on attention, and it's all about focus. Usually the mind is wandering. The mind is on automatic. It's piecing together, preoccupied with self-talk. We're talking to ourselves, and all these bits and pieces we weave into a narrative about who, what, myself. So it becomes a preoccupation with oneself. Well, constantly, if you listen to your own internal dialogue, the narrative, it tends mostly to be about oneself. So it becomes self-referencing. Constantly we're self-referencing and lost in mind wanderings, lost in distractions, rather than having presence. What is mindfulness? It's presence of mind. So it's simply paying attention. So this is an art. It's something that one trains oneself. The Buddha emphasizes again and again that we're training ourselves. And this mindfulness, if we present it as the original teacher, the Buddha, who had said he had rediscovered an ancient path, that it is sati. In the very basic teaching, as you would know, in the Eightfold Path, it's a practice path. And of course, it has a behavior base. One is the ethics, morality. One's harmonizing one's behavior, one's action, one's speech and livelihood. Surely that's the base. But there are 3 meditation skill set, as we might say. And the first is we apply ourselves. There's application. We make the effort and sustain that effort. And the core teaching in Buddhist mental culture is samasati. Sama means bright or skilled. Sati is mindfulness. So skilled mindfulness. And the third of these 3 skills is that intensification of that mindfulness. People say it's samadhi, that's the Pali term, but actually it's intensification of the mindfulness, because it naturally follows from application to mindfulness to intensification. But it's only with intensification, fluency in mindfulness, that we can have deep insight. You might be familiar with, I'm sure you are, many of you, with practice called vipassana. Yes? And hopefully you've practiced it. I'm afraid that's all I can speak on, because I've become a specialist in that practice. So this vipassana is actually the outcome, which means the insights, the deep insights that bring transformation of consciousness. The practice is sati, okay? We can call that mindfulness, presence of mind. So this attention is very important. The focus that we can sustain throughout the day, there's actually 3 ways to be mindful. We can be mindful internally, or introspectively, and possibly that would be mostly when we're in a static posture, so we can go deep into the body-mind phenomena. So there is internal mindfulness or introspection, and then there's external mindfulness when we're going through our senses, the sense doors, externally through the 5 senses, and also even the mind being the 6th sense. And then there's relation, how we relate to people and things. So that's the third way where we apply this mindfulness. This where we pay attention when we are actually engaged in some relationship with things or with people. So there's internal, that's introspection. External, when we're out in the outer world, and when we're in relationship. And there's different types of attention. So this is a matter of attention. Not partial attention, but full attention. And attention can be first selective attention. Selective in the sense that we focus on a particular thing. And when we have selective attention, then we deselect, if you like, the wandering mind, the things that distract us. So there's selective attention, and then there is open attention. So we have the balance between selective attention when we're focused on a particular thing, and then there's open attention. Hello, is that better? You've got to excuse me, I've been travelling all day. I don't know whether I'm going to be very coherent. Brother Chu's very kindly given me a chair, but if he'd given me a bed, I'd probably go to sleep. So, but anyway, here we are, as best I can be, being present. So there are degrees of attention, surely, yes. Partial attention. So, you know, to be a Buddhist, you might say you take precepts and take refuge, okay. But actually, to be a Buddhist, you follow the the practice path, the Eightfold Practice Path. And as far as the meditation, the mental culture is, the core practice there is this samadhi, which is this mindfulness, right? So while you might have a lot of knowledge, or you have some being brought up as a Buddhist, unless actually you're practicing mindfulness, how can you be on the path? Because that is the core practice, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. So, what about this practice? Do you think that practice makes perfect? It's a question. Not necessarily, you know, the old saying, practice makes perfect. Not necessarily so. There's an idea in the West that if you do 10,000 hours of practice, you become very fluent and skilled. It's a lot of practice, 10,000 hours. They have found too that if you do 3 months of continuous practice, it ingrains, it habituates whatever you've been doing. And that's quite true. But this 10,000 hours of practice, it depends. It can just become a mechanical, a routine sort of practice, you know, and people do that. They just practice and practice, you know, mechanically, and so what? For example, you know, monk, you might chant a lot, you know. So I can sit here, blah, 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 and my mind will go totally somewhere else. But I can keep up because it's become mechanical and habituated, but I'm not really present with what I am chanting. However much, you know, it might sound quite profound. I'm just chanting away and my mind's thinking about something else, you know, not with what I'm doing, you see. So that not having that presence of mind with what you're doing, not paying full attention, just partial attention, just being on automatic, having an automatic life, not on being an automatic pilot, you know, that's what we do. And I guess there's some relief in that because things are distressful and there's a lot of distractions around. There are probably 3 areas of distraction that don't allow us to be present, to be mindful. The first is emotions. We get lost in emotions so much, you know. That would be one thing. And then there would be this internal self-talk that goes on constantly, this internal narrative. But also, we live very busy lives, and we're caught up in the media. Even when we're supposed to be relaxing, we're entertaining ourselves with films and video, television, reading it. So we're distressed, you know, overloaded, overextended, overwhelmed. Many people are now. We're overwhelmed and distressed. And if we say, and that's actually the core meaning of dukkha or suffering, is this stress, distress. Because we don't give ourselves space. If we can maintain some presence of mind, we're not dragged in the past. We're not caught up anticipating what might happen or should happen in the future. We can hopefully maintain clarity of mind with what's going on now and not get distracted so much. You know, all Buddhist practice, you'll find, comes to the balance of mind. We can say that's the middle way. There's equipoise, equanimity. Even though we might be in a busy situation or in relationships that are quite intense, we should be able to maintain some degree of equipoise, of presence. Otherwise, we're going to get totally lost, you know, and reactive. And the benefit of mindfulness that we more and more, hopefully, as we develop, that we're less reactive. We create space in our mind, and we're not so impulsive, just knee-jerk sort of reactions all the time. So one of the huge benefits that come out of being mindful is that we start to see this impulsive. We start to be able to check the impulse and create a gap that before we actually act, we have that space that will support, make a space that we won't immediately react. So there's less impulses, there's less urges in the mind. And it's the Buddha said the cause of our distress, our suffering, is these urges in the mind. This this craving, this hankering in the mind. You see? Now we can hear that and say and agree or disagree, but how can we process it? How can we get to being accepting of things and not having these hankerings of the mind? And we can see that this practice actually purifies the mind, because what it's doing, it's releasing deeper levels of material, whether they're old traumas or old memories. And the Buddha said in the Satipatthana Sutta, in the very first sentence, in the preamble to the set of instructions he gave for mindfulness, the body, the feelings, the consciousness and the mental objects, the very first sentence says that this practice is for the purification of beings. Right? So what you find in mindfulness as a practice, as a meditation, and we've got to be careful this word meditation, people are calling this mindfulness meditation, but actually in the Pali tradition, we don't have a term for meditation as such. But if you go looking at a dictionary definition, you'll find that meditation means to think about, to ponder, to contemplate. But actually, the word bhavana, which is the Pali term for the practice, is to develop some quality of mind. Like we can do metta bhavana, so we develop good wishing, loving kindness, or vipassana bhavana is to develop mindfulness, you see. It's developmental. It isn't about meditating as such, because we're not thinking about, it's not conceptual. It's experiential, not conceptual. It's not theoretical. It's direct knowing, experiencing the phenomena. So if we're going to be mindful, we need, and we just practice some mechanical exercise. There's little or no benefit in it. But if we, when we say that we explore, say, some phenomena, the body phenomena, say the elements in the body, we need to tune into the body in various ways, tune in and find the specific characteristics in the phenomena. So I can move my arm, or I can internally know the movement of the air element in the abdomen. I can just, and if I pick up the specific characteristics there, or I can have more clearly say there's sensation in the body, which might manifest as some pain. So I can experience the pain. But if I get intimate with those painful sensations manifesting in the body and expose the specific characteristics which may be heat, throbbing, stabbing, so on, and there's no resistance in the mind, that exposes the specific characteristic. And if the specific characteristics are manifesting and there's the consciousness of those characteristics, there's one-to-one knowing of that. Specific characteristic, throbbing, stabbing, heat, so on, and the mind that knows it, the consciousness, then it will reveal from the specific, it will expose the general characteristic or the universal characteristic. That so-called pain changes. Everything in the universe is changing. It's not just climate change, my friend. It's everything is constantly changing. And this is not a Buddhist philosophy or doctrine. It's a universal. Everything is constant change. There's nothing that isn't or won't. Even the rocks and stone, that's all, it just depends, the rate of change. Everything is actually in flux and changing. So you can directly experience that. So that is an insight. If it is your own experience. So we can see these universal characteristics which bring deep insights and therefore transformation, not through any theory, but through actually doing, actually practicing. So it's very important that when we focus, we're focused, this focused attention, specific or selective attention, or even open attention, that we're finding not just a vague focus, but actually there's a very subtle, we're picking up the subtle, the nuances in the phenomena. So that only when that happens, and that of course that requires practice, that is actually picking up the characteristics, what we call the sabhava of the phenomena, specific characteristics, which will reveal the universal characteristics, which are always, it's in change, it's changing, it's stressful. Because of the change, it's stressful. And when we go deep enough, we will see that it is just process. There's processes of the mind and body. It isn't a personal thing. It's just natural processes of the mind and body. And often people don't like this idea, but whether it's an idea or not, but to a practitioner, he can have insight and see that these are just natural processes, and they're just impersonal processes. We personalize. We make a story out of it. We create an autobiographical self, when the reality is that everything's in constant change, that everything's actually, because of that, is distressful, and it's just natural processes happening, So people talk about, anicca, dukkha, anatta, but you can pick that out of the textbook. You can pick out everything is in flux and changing. Yeah, you can agree with that or not, and everything, and it's distressful, and there's all levels of that distress, that unsatisfactory, that's sure. And it's just anatta, well, not non-self. What does that mean? Oh, I don't know, sounds good, maybe I agree or disagree, but actually, as a practitioner, with clarity, with deep insights, you can know that. Each person can know that. You don't have to agree or disagree. You don't have to pay allegiance to being the doctrines or the philosophy of the Buddha. you can know it for yourself. You can have the clarity if you're prepared to pay attention, basically, and develop the practice of mindfulness, not only in the formal way, but also as a daily practice. And that's the challenge. You know, you can have, well, I'm very much coming from a more orthodox tradition of doing intensive long-term practice. But I can see the value also, even in an intensive practice situation, that as you get around in a retreat, that you also need to sustain the mindfulness in whatever you're doing. In fact, that's the key. That will deepen the practice. You can sit there and just do some exercise of introspection, being mindful of the body phenomena, the elements, or the breathing, and so on, and get up and just drop it all. But if you can sustain the practice throughout the day, it very quickly deepens and brings insight. And in fact, there's a fluency that comes by intensive practice, and we call it the elastic mind. There's a point in the practice when the mind becomes so mindful that it just can't help itself. There's a clarity in the mind, and it's seeing everything minutely, and through seeing specific characteristics, it is seeing the universal characteristics which I've been saying: change, constant change. Everything is changing at all levels. It's distressful, and it's just you're seeing processes, and that's one term that the Western meditation tradition is picking up. They're calling Vipassana process meditation, because that's really what it is. You know, we're seeing impersonal processes of the body and mind, not this selfie. We take pictures of ourselves, now we call them selfies. We have self-talk, and we're self-cherishing. You know, it's boring actually. But what happens in deeper practice, if we're prepared, it's not easy, because what happens, as the Buddha said, it's a purification of beings. What happens in Vipassana practice, which people find quite difficult, especially initially, until they get a good handle on it, is that this, what we call anusaya kilesas, these more negative material hidden, deep, dormant in the mind, is released. So in intensive practice, it will surface. Mm-hmm. And often people then will drop out. Even in very deep practice, they will drop out. It just gets too stressful, because they haven't, not able to accept what comes up. Be okay, be more equanimous. So you would expect, if you're doing intensive Vipassana, that material would surface, perhaps old memories, old traumas, and if you're very lost in being negative thoughts, there can be quite a lot of low level of anxiety, and it can be quite the practice can be quite distressful overall. But if you're prepared to allow material to come, it's like you're releasing phantoms in the mind, essentially. It's part of that purification process. The phantoms in the mind, the old traumas, old buried emotions and material is coming up. And you're slowly is able to observe them, to note them and let them go. It's like, people have recurring dreams. Especially children will have recurring dreams and, see some nightmarish image or story there, and they will break out. You will break out of that recurring dream. Seeing horror picture or disturbing picture. But once you're able to look at that image, whether it's through the meditation or during dream times, once you can look at that phantom, it's not a real thing, is it? So that's gone. So slowly, it's possible to clear the mind. And if you don't do that, you're walking around with all this stuff, this negative stuff, which is these kilesas of anger and old traumas, It's self-torture. Now we say that, the Dhamma, the first truth is suffering, dukkha. There's not really an English translation for that. I think the best one would be distress or unsatisfactoriness. But we're carrying that around with us. And when we're in relationship, that stuff is coming through. Often we get angry, not so much with a particular incident we're being provoked, but it's provoked this old material, and then we play it out. So the mind is not clean, because the Buddha said that actually the mind is luminous. It's like the mind is actually, but it's only polluted. You see, it's polluted with our self-narrative. The mind's most of us, unfortunately, it is that. And if we think that, why all this violence and suffering in the world, because the people's minds, we can't blame anybody else. We can't project it on anybody else. We must look into our own minds, and as best we can, through the practice of mindfulness, we can clear the mind. We can have clarity. We can purify the mind, and the mind will be when you actually have presence of mind, the mind is wholesome. People do samatha meditation, right, and they induce a state through one-pointedness, and they feel good because the mind, when it's concentrated in that way, is wholesome momentarily. But the Buddha we know went to two teachers whose names I can never remember before he became enlightenment, and learnt the higher levels of this concentration practice. You might know jhanas, we call them, absorptions, meditative absorption. He learnt and he mastered them, and more or less these teachers said, well, you can take over. But he said, no, it isn't the way of itself. Now I'm saying that concentration, samadhi, one-pointedness is a good base, if you can do it. But you guys, you're working, aren't you? You've got family and business, you're not going to get the jhanas. There's people going around advocating people do the jhanas. Now, I don't want to go on and put them down. I'm saying, yes, if you can do them, that's brilliant. But actually you need to spend many years under special conditions to do this type of concentration practice. You need to be supported in doing that. You need to have ideal, perfect conditions. I know a monk who goes around saying all this. I went to his monastery, and he's got a what would you call it, a cell, a sensory deprivation cell. You can't hear anything, you can't smell anything, you see. So yes, if you've got that sort of conditions, then it's possible over some years to get the high levels of jhana, of meditative absorptions. But then there's always been, even in the Buddhist time, a tradition of just pure vipassana, pure mindfulness. And you can't appreciate it unless you have, if you're on just the mindfulness path, that if you can sustain it throughout the day, the mind remains wholesome. You're in the present mostly, if not all the time. So the mind is wholesome. And you feel good. But the point about feeling good when you're a Vipassana meditator, it's just a mind state. You don't get attached to feeling good, to a concentrated state, because it's just a state that comes and goes. You can't maintain any state. They come and go all the time. So, but you can, if you, by staying present, with equanimity that builds up. Equanimity is the seventh of the Bojjhangas, that is the enlightenment factors, as you know. So it's the penultimate quality there before the big breakthrough, if you like. You know. Equanimity, equipoise. Now, what you find when you go through the practice of mindfulness, that's intensive emotion, you start to get a handle on emotions, you know. You don't react to emotions, they come and go. So you build up more balance of mind. Emotions come and go, pleasant, unpleasant, so you're not caught up in the old self-talk. The internal narrative so much. You can watch thoughts come and go. If you start noticing thoughts, so normally when the thoughts goes blah, 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 and we're probably not even aware that we're... You can ask people what's happening when they're not thinking. They don't know, because they're constantly, self-talking, they're constantly chatting away to themselves, this, that, the other thing, worried about this, anxious about that, It's constant, goes on. It's exhausting. You're leaking energy. When the mind becomes quiet, settled, equanimous, you're at peace more and more and more. You don't have to think about, stuff all the time. Sure, if you need to do some intellectual work, then you apply yourself. But why keep hassling yourself? You know that word, hassling? You keep bothering yourself all the time with this constant. And it can be, you need to check it. You need to break that circuit of this trains of discursive thinking, blah, 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 blah. What happens to the meditator? You start to notice, you start to focus on the thought itself. And you'll notice occasionally there's pauses in the trains of thought. It's possible then, if you're present, if you're mindful, to pick up the arising of a thought. Of course, thoughts will keep coming through, but slowly, you're able to see thoughts coming and going. The mind is not fascinated, is not hooked into this constant internal dialogue, which is exhausting. So there's more quiet and peace in the mind. There's less stress, there's less anxiety, there's less self-referencing. There's more equanimity, peace. Maybe possible there can be absolute peace. I don't know. Have you got any questions? I'm just rambling away. I don't know. Are you meditators in that sense? No, I wasn't. If you're a Buddhist, as I've been saying, I don't know how you can be a cultural Buddhist, sure. You can be a devotional Buddhist. But a Buddhist who practice both the sila, the samadhi, and the samadhi would mean the primary practice in mental culture is mindfulness. In the West, everybody's taken it up. mostly as a therapy. In the business world, you'll be more efficient if you're mindful at work, you know. You make more money for the boss, you know. It's for everybody, the children and schools that are teaching mindfulness. What are the Buddhists doing? Are you applying this skill, mindfulness, sati, in your life? I mean, it's not easy. As you see, the mind will just wander off because you're conditioned with this internal dialogue. But you don't have to be. I find actually, I'm in a monastery now, I'm building a Vipassana retreat centre in Australia, and I find actually if you go into nature more, you know, we're mostly urban people, especially in Australia. I think about 80, almost 90% of people live in the cities, you know, not so many people live in the country anymore, you know, having more natural life. And you find if you're in nature, the mind just settles down, you know, you're not overstimulated, you're not, and that's part of the problem. We are, you know, we're constantly feeding on the media, and what they call it information overload. It certainly is. We're just totally hyper stressed because we've got so much cruising in the mind. But we need to, as the kids say, chill out. And being in nature is one way to have a natural quietness in the mind. The Buddha always recommended that his practitioners would go out into the forest and well, he said sit at the base of a tree. I mean, I was recently in Lumbini and went to Kapilavas too, and the ruins there show actually the palace. Of course, it's the original palace was probably made of mud and material that didn't last. So, but Ashoka came 250 years later and built a brick palace over the ruins of the original. So it was quite an extensive Kapilavas too. So it was an urban, if you like, environment the Buddha was brought up in. But he's recommending people go out into the forest, go out into nature, and find a natural quietness. And that is the ideal place, especially because we're overextended, overbusy, and distracted by so many things. You just watch. I've just been travelling last week or so. I was in Nepal, Myanmar, Thailand. Here I'm coming now. And everybody's with their smartphones and fiddling away. Aren't they? We're totally absorbed in that world, you know. Nobody's looking around much. You know, we're living an automatic life, and so we're stressed. Is there a way out? Yeah, well, if we practice what the Buddha has said, then there's a way out. We can clear the mind, purify the mind, and have peace. Even absolute peace is potential. The Buddha very clearly states in the Satipatthana Sutta, the 4 establishments of mindfulness, that one can actually, this is the way to liberation. And in the 7 factors of enlightenment, the first two factors are sati, mindfulness coupled with investigation of the phenomena. Those two, investigation, experientially knowing the phenomena of one's own body and mind, is the first step that leads to transformation and healing. How can we be sitting here and saying that we're Buddhists when we're not practicing? I mean, what's the point? I wasn't brought up as a Buddhist. I mean, I've been a monk for 30 years and practiced since 1974. And that's what attracted me, was the practice. And what's a miracle that this teaching, the practice for establishments of mindfulness, is still available. I've followed it for the last 40 years. It's still available. And it's not impossible. It's not so difficult that a reasonably intelligent person will, if they can persist with the exercise of mindfulness, that they will get benefit, But I think too, it's important that you have a guide. We call it Kalyana Mitta. Because with the practice, it is an unknown territory of the mind and you can get into trouble. You need somebody, a teacher, to guide. You need a guide in the practice. You need to have that support and mentoring or even coaching in the practice. I think that's the difficulty, really. There's not enough people doing the deep practice. I practiced in Burma for many years, and I'm finding in the West people are doing just very superficial. They're doing sort of 10 days, a few days. And I'm hoping that eventually the place I'm hope to build, I'm starting building, finish, that we can do long-term practice. It's necessary while you can do it in everyday life. There's a tendency in the West to simplify things. We call it Dharma light. They have a sort of pre-digested Dharma. But actually it's not for everybody, we need people who can go deep into the practice, do intensive practice, and then able to pass it on. Otherwise, the teaching could be lost. The deep insights can be lost. Anyway, anybody got a question? I've been rattling on. Anybody like to sort of bring up something? I don't know whether I'm half asleep, so I'm thankful that Brother Chu he's given me a chair and a desk to lean on, but not a bed. If I had a bed, then I would probably be asleep by now.
Good evening, Bante. Okay, my question is, you are talking about mindfulness. So, if playing chess, is it a mindfulness? That's question 1. Playing chess, you're concentrating on the chess game, chess. Chess, C-H-E-S-S, chess. A game of chess.
Sorry?
A chess game. Chess, C-H-E-S-S. The game. Is playing chess mindfulness?
Chess.
That's question 1.
Chess is a game that you're working out moves, so it's not No. It's a concentration thing. It's working out strategies and moves. So we could say that's more of a test. I'm half deaf anyway. No, I wouldn't say that's what we would say. It's sati in that sati has that quality of finding the specific characteristics in a phenomena, whether it's physical or mental. So it's not finding it experientially, it's cogitating, it's the moves, strategies. No. But you could say you need concentration, definitely, but it's thinking, isn't it? Thinking isn't direct knowing. Thinking is, what's the word? Thinking is, it's conceptual. So it's not what we would understand to be picking up the characteristics of phenomena. We're looking at the body-mind phenomena, so actually what it is. Because what we're doing, what the Buddha said, is that we're identifying with 5 things, 5 groups of things. First, the body. We're clinging to the body as body phenomena. This is me, this is mine. This is self, body. The perception, what we recognize. Okay. The sankharas, which is the mental constructs. So in chess, I suppose, there's constructs, ideas, strategies, right? Feelings. That's another critical thing too in mindfulness, is to be knowing the feelings. Not only physical sensations, but mental feelings. Very critical to know pleasant, unpleasant feelings. We could talk all evening about feelings and emotions. But what we also, almost unknowingly, with unawareness, is the knowing itself, the consciousness, the chitta. We're not aware that we're knowing. So you're hearing this noise I'm making, these words. There's the sound and the knowing. You're seeing and the knowing, the smelling, tasting, touching and the knowing. There's consciousness there. And the Buddha said we're clinging to the knowing itself. Because there's waking consciousness, the sleeping consciousness is waking. And we're identifying with it. The problem is, it's a phenomena, it's just phenomena. It's impersonal, but it's this identification with it. That's the problem. The Buddha said we're clinging to it. We're attached to it. And that's the rub. We're identifying body, feelings, perception, the story, the mental constructs, but more subtly, the knowing, the consciousness. We're not aware, as you hear, as we touch in the sitting, that we're also, the sensation of the sitting, that contact, knowing. You see, there's a perceptual process, for instance, you see. We're perceiving all this stuff all the time. But the mind is not, there's a perceptual threshold. The mind is not sharp enough to pick up the perceptual process. So when you see something, or hear, smell, taste or touch, through any of the sense doors, there's contact, right? So there's eye, visible object, and contact, which is the sense impression. Instantaneously, there's a pair. There's a knowing, which is very subtle, but there's a feeling tone. There's an automatic thought that's attached to that sense, to that sense impression. And then the mind plays with it. The mind elaborates on that thought, and off it goes, you see. And that's what's happening constantly, because there's liking. So it's something you like, you pull it in, There's something that's unpleasant, you push away. So unknowingly, through all the senses, through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting and touching, and in the mind itself, in the intellect, there's liking, disliking, like and disliking, and that is conditioning us. We're caught in that conditioning. And that's it. We're conditioned and that's it. We don't know the reality. We're caught in pleasant, unpleasant. And even there's pleasant, and there's degrees of it. So if we start noticing, the key thing is we can notice our thinking, we can notice our feelings, we can notice the mind states, without making any judgment, without evaluating. That's the positive. See, what we're very inclined to do is always be evaluating, judging, or there's expectation in the mind all the time, isn't there? Especially if we're practitioners of any type. So feelings are critical. So in the set of instructions the Buddha gave are the 4 establishments, foundations of mindfulness, if you like. Body phenomena. We tend to go towards the elements in the body because they will manifest if you tune into them of themselves. We're not analyzing, we're not dissecting the body. If we tune into the body, the elements of the body, not as concepts, but as their specific characteristics, like the temperature in the body, there's heat, or the wind element, there's movement, there's vibration, there's support. There's all these specific characteristics of the elements. They will manifest if you tune into the body experientially, and you will see that those elements will just be elements. They're not, they're not identified with as my body as a whole thing. They're just elements manifesting, coming and going, and they'll do their own thing, which is quite mind shift turning. So this identification with the body, identification with the feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, which comes liking, disliking, and even when there's no particular strong feeling, then there's neither pleasant or unpleasant, the mind drifts away. We're not knowing. If we have a strong feeling, there's sadness or anger or elation or happiness or whatever, okay, there's a strong feeling, liking, disliking, you see. So we're caught all in this. You might know the 8 worldly winds, you know about those, don't you? They're pairs. There's liking and disliking. They're opposites. And they're worldly things. We're caught up in liking, disliking. There's gain and loss. Okay? We're caught up in gain and loss. We gain, we have good business or good work or job or something, and then we'll lose a job and we're unemployed or we're bankrupt or whatever. There's gain and loss, or we have a good relationship, we'll lose it. All these things come and go all the time. And people appreciate us, honor us, or they think we're, the other way. Dishonor. And there's happiness. Okay, it's not all miserable and suffering. You can be happy, sure, circumstances. But there's the flip side is there's unhappiness. So we're caught within these 8 worldly conditions, or worldly wind, or the winds, if you like. But if you are mindful, the mind tends to be bipolar. I'm not saying you're clinically bipolar, but we're more inclined to be bipolar. We seesaw from one extreme to the other. You have to be more conscious to maintain the balance between get hyped up, overexcited, or going down into a depression, black hole. To maintain that even keel you have to be more conscious. and more present, be more mindful, to maintain the equanimity. As I said, equanimity comes out of being mindful, having presence of mind. It's the maturity in the practice. It's the penultimate factor for enlightenment. When you do intensive practice, Sankarupeka, the mind is very balanced. It's a very beautiful state. It doesn't get overexcited and it doesn't get down and negative and depressed. It maintains its even keel. Okay, difficult things can happen, but you accept them, or you get the difficulty in Vipassana practice. With fluency of the practice, you get some jhana effects. You get, nice concentration effects. But we call those the corruptions of insight, because the mind gets fascinated, wants more of those. So we have to build up being okay, being more accepting, and having more, so we have more balance, and we don't go up or down, we just maintain an even keel. And so even with these worldly winds, if there's gain and loss, there's happiness, unhappiness, we can maintain that balance of mind. So we're off the hook. The Dharma, the Buddha's Dharma, gives you that potential. But it's not handed on a plate, and nobody else can do it for you. Somebody can inspire you, somebody can guide you, but my friend, there's no gurus in the Buddha Dharma. There's no way you can absorb somebody else's understanding. I'm afraid you're bad luck. You've got to do the work yourself. There's no other way. There's no other possibility. There's no magical, esoteric initiation that will bring any transformation. Somebody can make you feel good, sure, and but nobody can do the work for you. So it is, and it's not an easy path, and it's not people inclined to do it. But I'm saying, if in the West, especially with neuroscience, they're looking at the brain, looking at the functions of the brain, the limbic system, the prefrontal lobes, and we need to as practitioners look into that research and those findings. That it's actually verifying the Buddhist practice of mindfulness. They're taking it over. They're using it mostly as a healing, as a therapeutic tool, but it's much more than that. You see, it's also for transformation of consciousness. And even if to do it in the more orthodox way, with having a morality-based lifestyle, then there's also inbuilt healing in it. In fact, what they've interestingly found in studies that the benefit of mindfulness, if you're looking from a Western neuroscientific way, is actually biological. It will heal almost any stress disorder. Or say, so why aren't the Buddhists doing it very much? Why isn't it the practice, the people who Buddhist in name can be Buddhist in practice. And while you certainly can be devotional and without doing the practice, you're not doing the Eightfold Path. And in all the traditions, whether it's Mahayana, Theravada, Vajrayana, any other yana you can think of, would all agree that the Four Noble Truths of the Eightfold Path are the core teachings. Doesn't matter all the sophistication, all the elaboration, the philosophical discussions of the Abhidhamma or this or that teaching or that. But actually when it all boils down, it's the Eightfold Path we're practicing. And if we're doing mental culture, it is those three factors, these skills, these skill sets, if you like. Application, sustained application or effort, samasati, that is the key. Sama means right or skilled mindfulness. That is the core practice in mental culture in the Buddha Dharma. The next one is Samadhi, and my interpretation is not just a concentration practice, but it is intensification of that mindfulness, because it naturally follows application to mindfulness to intensification, and then out into the effects of it, which are, when we say that we know the three characteristics, we say there it's panya. Panya means insights. And the insights are these, not some Buddhist doctrine, but these universal characteristics that everything's in constant change. That's in ourselves too. There's nothing that can remain. Everything goes through these three phases. There's a beginning, middle, and end. There's birth, life, and death. That is the natural order of things, whether we like it or not. We're all going to go through that cycle. And we can see that in the practice. We can see that in the phenomena as we meditate, that there's a beginning, a middle, and end. Birth, life, and death. There's three phases in everything. That everything is changing. That the mind can be cleaned. We can have clarity. We can have equanimity. We can have peace, potentially. When the mind is clear, clean, cleansed, purified, there's possibility of absolute peace. But I don't think chess will come into it, because the mind will be still working out its strategies, its moves. It's not a game, it's very deep practice. Any questions, any sort of comments? I don't know. Who practices here? Who practices mindfulness here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, it's all at levels, isn't it? I mean, you don't have to hours and hours, months. We're all at different levels, Beginner, more mature. And it can also be done quite informally. It can be done, as we go through tomorrow evening, wherever you are, in your daily routine, People in the text too, in the suttas, you'll find people who got enlightened, some people who were in a domestic situation, people with a family and the kids and the cooking and the doing the stuff at home. Applying mindfulness in that situation. Yeah. There's many examples, stories of people in a domestic situation get enlightened. It's not just a monk or nun sitting out, cross-legged in the forest. It can be done. can integrate it into daily life. But that's not easy. It's easy enough to say. It's quite a challenge, really.
Bante, I have a question. For a beginner to go into meditation, which method is easier, Anapanasati or Vipassana? And after learning 2 or 3 years of Anapanasati, how to go into the Vipassana meditation?
How to go to what, sorry? How to go to what?
Go to Vipassana.
Satipatthana.
I mean, let's say I've been learning Anapanasati for 2 years, then now I want to start learning Vipassana. How to change, I mean, is that a method to go into the Vipassana meditation?
Yeah. In the Anapanasati Sutta, if you went through that, you'll find that it continues from getting the jhanas onto Vipassana. Have you read the Satipatthana Sutta? Study of yeah. Well, the Anapanasati Sutta mostly is used just as a it defaults to a concentration practice. But actually, if you read the Satipatthana Sutta as a set of instructions, it continues on into Vipassana. So you can definitely use Anapanasati as a base and then move into Vipassana mode. In the Satipatthana Sutta, that's for establishments of mindfulness, in Kayanupassana, that is in the body, there is Anapanasati there. Now, in an early text, I don't know, there's some scholar monks have found that some early texts that they were in Chinese, but they obviously come from an early tradition, that in the list of the practices on the body, mindfulness of the body, Anapana wasn't there. It's an added thing later on, which is understandable, as various other things, as far as in Dhammanupassana on mental objects. The Four Noble Truths weren't there. There's actually 2 texts. There's Satipatthana Sutta and the Maha, great Satipatthana Sutta. So there's obviously material being added in, which is okay, but it would say that there has been a tradition that it's not necessarily, I can give you many examples of that, of going into Anapanasati at all. We just call it pure Vipassana, that without the support of samatha. But if you do very intensive Vipassana, pure Vipassana, some teachers like one of the main Burmese masters, Sadhu Pandita, calls it Vipassana jhana. You're familiar with these terms I'm using, jhana? Are you familiar with that term? It means a meditative absorption, usually associated with a pure one-pointedness, concentration practice. But if you're doing very intensive Vipassana, you get to the fluency, and it's necessary that you almost get a Vipassana jhana. That's very high concentration, but it's associated with the sati, not fixed concentration. In the Anapanasati Sutta, that's the text. In fact, I've just been in Bangkok and went to Buddhadasa's archive, and I've got some material from him on the Anapanasati Sutta, which I'm putting up online to explain it, because it's very involved and detailed, complex, if you like, about the moving from. But essentially what you're doing when you come out of a jhana, a meditative absorption, which you've induced through one-pointed concentration, you're looking at the mind state that's been induced itself. You're looking at that mind state. Mm-hmm. you're focusing then on that mind state. So, for instance, if you were doing any sort of samatha practice, anapanasati, or even metta bhavana, you would get one pointed concentration and go through the jhana factors. Yes, you know about the jhana factors? Do you know about the jhana factors? You'd go into unification of mind. It's used. Then you would come out of that and look at that. You would, from a mindfulness point of view, you would look at the characteristics of that state that's been induced, and that's the way you would switch from a concentration-based practice where there's an induced state. It may be a jhana, it may be a full absorption or not, or partially so, and you would look at that state. Its characteristics of that state that's been induced, and that's essentially what you're doing in the instructions in the Anapanasati Sutta. So, in fact, even in deeper vipassana, it's necessary to get the equivalent of that intensification of a jhana. That's why Sadhu Pandita, one of the main disciples of Mahasi Sayadaw, says we call it vipassana jhana. But to get that jhana in pure vipassana, every blink of the eye would be mindful of. 12 to 14 hours a day, every movement one makes. It's not a casual, superficial thing. It's very intense mindfulness that builds up that intensity. And it's that intensity, that fluency, that will build up the momentum and the penetration that comes, that we'll see deeply into the practice. Because unless you build up that intensity, you will not see have the ability to see the perceptual process. The perceptual process, a normal person would not see the perceptual process. It's just too fast. The mind's not subtle. It can't pick up that sharp enough, not fast enough. I was in Barre, Massachusetts in Insight Meditation Society, I think 1981 or 81 or 2, I'm not sure now. And nearby, there's Harvard University, and there was a chap called David Brown, who was a psychologist there doing a study on meditation and the rate of perception, right? The rate of perception is critical for a meditator to pick up the perceptual process. And in Barre, Massachusetts, the Insight Meditation Society, they do a 3 months intensive retreat, Vipassana retreat. And they tested 30 local meditators, and they had another group who were mostly staff who have been practitioners as a checking group. They checked them for the beginning of a 3 months Vipassana retreat, intensive Vipassana retreat. Now people are doing 12 to 14 hours a day, right? And they had this gadget, a black box, they call it a tracheoscope, T-scope, and it flashed a light, and they were able to read the rate of that person's perception picking up that light. Okay, so they tested these people 3 months before the intensive retreat and after. After 3 months practice, they found that the rate of perception for most people had increased at least 100%, some much more. And that was the first time they had found that the rate of perception could actually be increased to enable that person to pick up the perceptual process. Normally you wouldn't do it. A normal person wouldn't pick up the perceptual process. As I said, to pick up when there's the sense impression and the consciousness bang and immediately a thought, feeling there, and a thought and then elaboration. Mostly we automatically make an association and we're caught up in it, elaboration. Just happens in the mind. But when the mind is very sharply tuned and it can pick up the threshold of the perceptual process, it's able to pick up that feeling and the thought without... If you can pick up the thought, it's immediately inhibited. Okay? So it's that only comes through practice. Mm-hmm. Not casual, occasional, you know. We need that intensification, not just concentration. Mm-hmm. So that's always been a debate, whether it's fixed concentration, which induces a state, but you're locked into that state. There's not necessarily mindfulness at all in there. Mindfulness is the crucial factor. But that mindfulness has to intensify for it to deepen. So you can read the Satipatthana Sutta and it'll go into details of it. But there's a very good commentary by Ajahn Buddhadasa, and that's even on BuddhaNet, if you want to look at that material.
Good evening, Bhante. How can we integrate the mindfulness in the sense of when you say right attention, it's not in the Eightfold Path. Can right attention means clear comprehension with mindfulness? That's my question. Is right attention, the Buddha didn't mention right attention. He says there's right mindfulness, sati, and then there is right concentration, and then there is right effort in the wisdom factor. But there's no right attention being mentioned. But there is only sati, samasati, samivayama, and samadhi. And samadhi. So if you integrate all these, is it called right attention?
It's a matter, it's a semantic thing, isn't it? You know, you can say right awareness, you can say right attention, you can say mindfulness. But what do we mean by mind? What's being mindful? Mindful is paying attention, isn't it? It's simply paying attention. Being mindful is paying attention, isn't it? I mean, we don't want to get, you know, into sort of semantic games whether we're going to call it attention or mindfulness. But it's attention. Mindfulness is the training of attention. Mm-hmm. Mindfulness is training the attention, the ability to focus, whether it's selective focus or open focus. Mm-hmm. So attention or mindfulness or awareness, we can use all these terms, but whether the Buddha, you know, so whether it's not really a matter of what we how we render a Pali term of sati. See, there's another term that's very interesting, sati sampajana, right? Sati sampajana has been rendered as full attention. And that's quite commonly done as attention, sati, but sampajana can also be comprehension. And that's saying you can be attention but not you can be present but not pick up the characteristic. And that's the critical thing in mindfulness, whether you're actually uncovering the specific characteristics. And there's a Pali term which means sabhava. Sabhava means particular or specific lakkhana characteristic. That is in the Pali terminology. So that's what we've got to find. Attention, presence of mind, will expose experientially specific characteristics, will give us the general or universal characteristics. You see, that's what I said, practice. Practice doesn't mean just sort of mechanical practice. You really need to tune in experientially and almost sense out the characteristic and the phenomena. It is not analytical, it's not intellectual. It's picking up, see, and that's why there has to be a fluency that eventually accesses the sabhava, or these particular characteristics, and then the whole thing opens up. There's a whole different level. And that comes through training in mindfulness, if you like. I mean, some people can't work out what mindfulness is. I've had people say, well, what's mindfulness? Full of mind? What's mind? So you can use these terms, but selective attention will definitely inhibit the distractions. Open attention will allow you to become more self-aware. Because we can get too, with samatha, the problem is we get too locked in, we get too confined. Whereas having open awareness allows more the intuitive side of things to come into the thing. So that balance between focus, selective attention, which inhibits distractions surely, and this sort of open awareness, but not, it's a balance. It's not just sort of letting the mind run, and it's not holding the mind locked into something. So it's a balance. In practice, it's not just always static sitting, which tends to default to concentration, into a concentration, one-pointed mode. It's also one, in our practice, we also do walking, formal walking, and emphasize as you move around throughout the day, whatever you're doing, whether you're eating, or going to the bathroom, as is in the text, it is a continuity of presence of mind that will expose the reality of the phenomena, its characteristics, which will clear the mind. So we're not, therefore, it will clear all the hidden traumas and negative emotions and create more balance. I mean, for me, the middle way is the balance of mind. It's freeing the mind from its constant self-referencing. What's your thinking? What's your thinking throughout the day? What's it doing? Constantly self-referencing all the time. We're creating, from all the bits and pieces, a narrative about ourselves, aren't we? If you watch your thoughts, it's always about me, stuff. We're self-absorbed, self-cherishing. When you have mindfulness, you become more emphatic, more able to see other people's things, have more peace in your own mind. without the self-talk, without the self-cherishing. You know. Actually, it is it's suffering, isn't it? It's almost like self-torture. Of course, we have highs, but mostly it's sort of self-torture. We're worrying about this. There's a level of anxiety, maybe low-key, but it's there a lot of the time, you know. So the Buddha's given us a way of clearing the mind, bringing transformation and healing. And if we don't take it up, how can we say we're followers of the Buddha? We might have the images, we might have the robes, we might have the culture. It's nothing. Doesn't mean nothing. Unless we're practitioners of the Eightfold Path. What's the point of it? I mean, it's very difficult for cultural Buddhists, if you've been brought up as a Buddhist. You know, I was unfortunately brought up as a Christian, you know. Okay. But as an outsider, it's easier to see the core practices. I'm not being conditioned as a Buddhist, okay? So as an outsider, I didn't know about Mahayana Theravada and the culture, I just knew about the teaching. And that's what attracted me originally. And for the last 40 years, I'm still going, and I'm happy to continue on until I'm finished. This life or next one or many lives, it doesn't matter. You know, more and more as you go into deeper and deeper in it, it's what one does. And even when the Buddha was enlightened, he never stopped. It's not suddenly got a big sort of flash and it was all over. He's well known for continue on and meditating and practicing as he went on too. It's probably all you could do if you got to that level anyway. Anyway, the evening is over, unless you want to carry on. So thank you for being here. And okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.